Welcome to the Writers League of Texas podcast, conversations and presentations featuring writers and industry professionals talking about the craft and business of writing. More information about this discussion, including details on our panelists and presenters, can be found at writersleague.org. We hope you enjoy the discussion.
Welcome to the first third Thursday of 2019. Our conversation tonight is tips for starting or restarting a writing project, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. To my left is Katherine Catmull. She loves revision, whether she's revising her own work or others as a freelance editor. She's the author of Summer and Bird, won a Book List 2012 Top 10 First Novels for Youth, and a TLA Spirit of Texas Reading Pick, and the YA fantasy The Radiant Road, which received starred reviews from Publishers Weekly and School Library Journal. She's one of 4 co-authors of The Cabinet of Curiosities, a collection of scary short stories named one of the New York Public Library's 100 Best Children's Books of 2014. And she's an actor and a produced and published playwright. Please welcome Katherine. Lindsey Lane is an award-winning playwright and children's and young adult author. She earned her MFA in writing for children and young adults from the Vermont College of Fine Arts. Her debut novel, Evidence of Things Not Seen, is a, quote, unique, powerful novel, said Francisco Stork, author of Marcello in the Real World. Publishers Weekly said it offers a gripping and genre-bending mosaic. Lindsey is also the author of the award-winning picture book and iTunes app, Snuggle Mountain, illustrations by Melissa Awai, which was named Best Children's Book of 2004 by Bank Street College of Education. Please welcome Lindsey. Melanie Westerberg's short fiction has appeared in the Best New American Voices and the Ice Cream Social 2015-2017 anthologies, as well as the Austin Chronicle, 1111, Mid-American Review, Third Coast, and Torpedo. She's the author of the chapbook Ripple. She's been a writer in residence at a lot of places, the Kimmel Harding Nelson Center for the Arts, the Madronio Ranch, Brush Creek Foundation for the Arts, and Gentile, and she holds an MFA in writing from the California College of the Arts, where she studied weaving and textiles history along with creative writing. Please welcome Melanie. And Rene S Perez II is the author of 2 books, Along These Highways and Singing Off the Johns. His decade-plus experience in publishing, manning the slush pile for literary magazines, editing creative works, working with editors on his own fiction, has taught him how to diagnose, tear apart, and rebuild stalled projects. He lives and teaches in Austin, Texas. Please welcome Renee. All right, so let's get started. And since you're to my left, Katherine, I'll start with you. So we started about starting a new writing project. This is the time of year when people have New Year's resolutions. We're going to sit down and we're going to write. And of course, you sit down and you face your blank sheet of paper or your blank screen. And what? How does one actually begin? Is the beginning when you sit down to write? Or is the beginning some earlier point before you actually write that first word? When you're writing a new project, you're saying, this is the new thing I'm going to write. How do you begin?
Well, I mean, there's probably a lot of different ways. If you're me, you have several ideas kind of cooking around. And the idea that I like to choose is the one that I don't understand, the one that is most sort of opaque, so it seems like a seed that might grow into something, as opposed to an idea that is very clear to me. I know exactly what would happen at every point along the way, which tends to just kind of, for me, those ideas fizzle out. The opaque seed-like ideas are the most exciting ones. And then, heck, just start writing. It probably won't be the beginning of your book, but it might be. My first book, the very first sentence I wrote was the very first sentence that stayed. Not a lot else stayed, but that first sentence stayed. So, yeah, just write where it's fun. I mean, I'm really feeling that more and more. Just write into what interests you, what pulls you, what gives you joy. It's not always, sometimes it's tearful joy but just, yeah. That's what I'd say, right? Begin as you mean to continue. And that shouldn't be by whipping yourself. Sit down and be creative right now.
Lindsey, how about you? I mean, because you've written, a picture book and then, a book for older youths or adults. Yeah. Those are very different kinds of things. When you have all those ideas bouncing around in your head, there's different kinds of things you're working on. How do you choose which idea to start with? How do you, what's your first word? What's your process to getting to that first word?
Okay, so Stephen King says, tell yourself the story. So if I have an idea, I start talking about it on the page. And it's like the narrator's talking to me. And then I start to go, okay, there's a world starting to come together. But yeah, I have written a lot of different things. And when you get focused on one thing, you have to just stay with it.
So you would recommend not switching back and forth. You would say find a thing and stick with it until when?
Like Katherine said, I have this note by my computer. It's write the next scene that you know you need. And it's like, usually there's something really juicy there to figure out. And instead, you're not trapped in all the pedestrian stuff of like, okay, they have to be in breakfast world, and then they have to be in the... No, you want to be in the juicy stuff. You can set it later. But yeah, I think you in the very beginning, you're telling yourself a story, and then you just go into a scene, figure out what it is, what the world is about.
And so don't feel trapped by like the linearity of like, here's what happens literally next.
Yeah, I mean, some people say, well, can you write the ending first? Why not? I mean, Marion Dane Bauer, 100 children's books, she often writes the ending so she knows the feeling that she wants to have when she gets to the end. It can change. It's words on the page. But yeah, I don't think you need to be trapped with linear. Of course, I wrote a book with 26 points of view, so...
That's what every editor recommends, I believe. Melanie, so one of the things that is involved when you're first sitting down to write, and kind of like when you're sitting down to write every time, is you have to get in the right headspace. And I know that in your day job, you're working with like legal documents and things that are not creative. Like you don't read them and get the creative spark. And then, of course, then you're going to do your creative writing. How do you switch? Like, how do you make the transition from the places that your brain has to go in the day for like your pain work to like the creative writing that's also words on a page, but very different kinds?
I've started kind of doing it in the opposite order, where when I can, I actually try and do the creative work before I go to my job work. For years and years, I had a really hard time coming home and settling down to write, and then I realized it's because it's extremely difficult, and it's, for me, like much easier to write in the morning, although not so easy to get up. But my favorite strategy that I have developed to sort of get into a more creative or associative mindset, I guess, is to just give yourself 5 or 10 minutes and then just pick a topic and then just list everything that you can think of about that. And if anything comes up, like any sorts of images or anything, you could list those as well. But this exercise was taught to me by a teacher I had called Catherine Bowman, who lives in Indiana, and her favorite topic was just write everything that you're afraid of, which could take up a really long time. So we were just sitting there writing all of our fears for 5 or 10 minutes, and it's something I've kind of started doing regularly. Or just other ones where, everybody you've ever met, or everything you want, or just things that you can think of, everywhere you've ever been. And that really helps me settle down and get into a different space, because it's also rhythmic, too, which is helpful.
What do you find happens? So for 5 or 10 minutes, you're just writing just whatever comes to mind, and you give yourself a kind of like general direction. Do you just sort of naturally stop listing and start writing something that's not a list? Or do you have to say, okay, my 5 or 10 minutes are up, I should probably do something else? Or
I do my list, and then I stop doing it, and then I do something else. Although if I'm trying to think of ideas, I might circle things on the list and try and think about associations between them. But it's really just a way to switch gears. That's a cliche. But yeah, it's just a way to get into a different state, I think. And then if I'm still having problems, I might read it out loud, which is another thing that helps me get focused and get ready to do creative work.
And Renee, I know it's kind of along the same idea of like getting your mind in the right space. I know that like you make playlists. You can tell us about that. How does that work?
So it started with my second book. I had, finished the first draft of it, sent it out into the world, and was just getting a little bit of, something's missing. And upon going back into it and trying to figure out what was what, I broke it up into different sections. The book was kind of written in halves, intermittent halves, of like an omniscient section, close III omniscient. It was about a town and a guy. And so what I did was I went through and I broke it up into sections. Town section, boy section, town section, boy section. And I tried to find out where I was going wrong, because I knew something was missing, despite the fact that when you first get that bit of like, negative feedback, like, them, they're wrong. But, in my heart of hearts, it was just like, I'll eventually have to face this. And one thing that I did, and one thing that I do, is I wrote a next thing. Upon realizing, this book isn't going to happen on the timeline that I want it to happen in, because my first novel was my second book. The first book was a collection of short stories. The University of Arizona Press put it out, and as such, they're pretty much just Texas stories, Chicano lit, Southwestern stuff. So I got the reviews and the recognition here in the Southwest, and so it's just like I have enough people, like I did a thing, so maybe they'll pay attention to the next book. And I thought, okay, that'll streamline how that'll happen. I didn't account for the fact that the book wouldn't be ready when I thought it was. And so upon getting those first, bits of feedback a bunch of them were useless, but the ones that I really saw that the people who had read it had put thought into it and come up wanting more. And I realized, okay, so I wrote a play. I don't write plays. But I did. I had this idea, had to do that. It was a palate cleanse, pretty much nothing more. And when I came back to it, I was ready to do that. But I couldn't figure it out. I'm telling this whole long story because you asked about playlists. I listen to music all the time. I'm constantly listening to music. I listen to music at work. Anytime my brain is allowed to be mine, I have music playing. Music's playing, listening to a song, reading the thing, listening to a song, and Thunder Road came on, the Bruce Springsteen song. And there was just something about it. My character wasn't explicitly kind of like using, hey, let's leave town to trick a girl into having sex with him. But if you've heard Thunder Road, that's what it's about. And if you haven't, it's a good song anyway. But and I realized, okay, well, there needs to be a flight from this town. That needs to be where it's going. And in order to get there, I need my protagonist's motivation to be more clear. And so I backtracked through that, and it was all thanks to that song. And upon working through my revisions, I listened to just a ton of Bruce Springsteen. Finished that, moved on to the next story. This manuscript that I have out in the world, things are happening with it, / they're not. Like, I get to a part in it where I needed to immerse myself in kinds of emotions. And I had stumbled upon a couple songs upon listening to stuff on random, one of which was No Children by the Mountain Goats. It's about the dissolution of a marriage, and it's in the section where everything's falling to and so I hear that song, and I was just like, writing isn't my only job. I teach high school. When I'm at high school, I'm actually pretty good at it. And so, like, I'm not, like, thinking about writing. You can't turn your mind off. But when I'm there, I'm there. And so anytime my mind is mine to have, I also have 2 small children, I'm constantly pouring music in there. And so I came up with this thing of like, I will make a divorce playlist. And I had previously shared one with a friend of mine who was going through a divorce. And I went back to that and I added songs to it. And there was this thing about these songs that fit around a tone and fit around an idea and a happening that, mind you, it only exists kind of on the computer and mostly in your mind. And I mean, I don't mind saying, like, I'm unagented. So every word that I've written to this point, nobody's asked me to write. Nobody has said, here's this money, go write this book. I don't know why I do it. I'm assuming all of you are in the same position too, right? And so it's like, okay, like, this is a world I want to live in and I want my brain to be in. And anytime my brain can be mine, I was pouring in songs and doing that. That really did help in going back into sections upon revision and in restarting that section in times when the kids were sick or work was extra hard or I just wasn't able to write. And, like, you're a bad boyfriend or girlfriend to whatever you're writing, unless that's all you're doing. But in order to be able to get back to it, I constantly have notebooks. I'm always writing ideas. Anything that comes to me, I don't mind putting down a line. Like, I'm stealing that time from no one. And so that is something that I found that really works, and I'm doing it with the next thing, my next project.
I wonder, and Katherine, I'm particularly curious about this one for you because you're a playwright as well and you do acting. And like, even like when George Saunders was here a while back, and like you did part of the voice work for
That was
his
so
reading,
thrilling. Yes.
and I would assume that like voice is something that you're drawn to because that's so much of what like stage work is all about in acting. How do you find the voice for your characters? How do they? Is it the sort of thing where they just sort of like drop into your head and then you transcribe it, or are there tricks that you have for finding the way that they talk and this sort of their take on the world?
I mean, for me, I just have to write it. This is especially true for the narrative voice. There's always a narrative voice, even if it's not a real personality-heavy narrator. There's always some narrative voice, and the narrative voice is the one that takes the longest for me. And so a lot of my first chapter writing and rewriting, and so, like, it takes forever, those first couple of chapters, and a lot of that is just finding the voice. And I don't know any way to do that except to keep writing until it's like, oh, yeah. That is exactly how to tell this story. Character voices are a little different in that you have to be careful that you don't get people sounding too much alike. And I just cheat and think of people I know. I'm like, writers are like magpies, and I'll just steal somebody's voice and put it with somebody else's face and somebody else's problem, and boom, it's a character. But yeah, I'm a very slow reader, and there's like classes they'll give you to teach you how to be a fast reader, but because it turns out the reason when you're a slow reader, it's because you're hearing it in your head. It's like someone's reading you the story. But I like that. That's my favorite part of reading, and so I don't want to have it fixed. And consequently, though, narrative voice is really important to me. And when you're reading a book, it's like you're in a Volkswagen Bug with somebody in a cross-country trip, and they're talking the whole time, telling you a story. So, I mean, if you don't like their voice, just open that door and kick them out. That's what I say. Find someone better. Anyways, so voice, especially if you're somebody who hears it in your head, and if you're not, you know what? Slow down and hear it in your head, or read it out loud, or whatever will allow you to actually hear the narrative voice and the voice of the characters, and that will make a huge difference, I think.
Because you write plays, which are all dialogue except for a bit of stage direction. Do you find, does that translate into the dialogue in your books, or do they feel like separate things, like the ways that you write dialogue in a play versus the ways that you write it in a book?
They probably ought to be more separate than I make them. In a play, it's just easier to write like broken up natural language, and in a book, sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But I'm revising a play right now, and the woman who commissioned it was reading my first draft, and she said, you need to get out of your novelist thing and stop putting, these long parentheticals about the attitude the character had and what she was thinking while she said that and stuff. Just stop it. Trust the actor. Just get it out in the words. So, yeah, you have a lot more tools. You're like the director and the actor and the camera person and everything. When you're writing, you get to take all those roles.
Renee, I saw you nodding when she said, like, revise it to death. And that's, when people are restarting a story, there's always that risk, right? Like, when you come to something with a lot of time between you and the time that you wrote it, you're a different person, you're a different writer, you're a different reader, you've got different sensibilities. And so you're like, I know what I'm going to do, and I'm going to totally rewrite this thing. And then sometimes it works, and it's great. And other times you're like, but I've killed this thing that was actually driving it forward, and now it's just dead. And it's deader than it was when I started it. And so when you're tackling something, especially like, you've got kids, you've got work, like, so like you're not going to have like a steady stream of writing. You're going to come back to stuff cold. How do you find whatever it was the spark that was sort of igniting and driving that story, and not just totally rehash it in a way that just kills it?
I mean, I have to come clean first with the fact that I don't think I'd ever revise a story to death because, and I apologize if you're going to get back to this question. He sent us a list of questions to kind of think about, and one of them was, do you expect your first page to stay the first page? That's a really good question, and I most certainly do. From when I first started writing, like, I'm not a go, 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 go. I can fix it in a little bit. I can fix the language or the punctuation. I can't do that. Like, going down the page, I'll keep looking up at the thing that I know wasn't what I wanted it to be. It either is awkward or wasn't as poetic as I had hoped for it to be. My narrative voice isn't me, but it is uniquely mine. I do and don't think that I am in that narrator. I know I am. Obviously, it came from me. I cooked it up here. Clearly, I use my own turns of phrase. I don't ever write in the first person. There's always narrative removed from me. But with writing and with my fiction, I believe it's magic, but not like divinity or like supernatural. I think it's a magic act, and so I am a revealer. I'm a teller, I'm a shower. I will say this, though. Upon coming up with an idea for a story idea isn't a story idea to me unless I know where it's going. Unless I'm walking around, looking at the world, taking in the mundane, and I see something, and I think, oh, well, there's that thing. How did that get there? Where will it end up? And if in that moment I think, oh, well, this could be that. It could be there because of this. These people can do this, and this is naturally what would happen. If that doesn't happen to me, it doesn't occur to me to start a story. So if I have committed my brain to thinking that far into it, that it will be a story, I know where it's going. So I'll never get back into something and just feel lost for where it is.
Oh, I'll stop you there for a second, because that idea of like knowing where it's going is certainly comfortable, right? When you're writing and you don't know where it's going, that's when it's easy to quit, because you're like, I don't know. And if you've started a novel in the past and haven't finished it, which a lot of people do, then you'll sometimes like begin a new one. Like, I'm not gonna mess around this time. I'm gonna outline this sucker. I'm gonna figure out where it's going. I'm gonna finish this book. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I guess sort of to all of you, do you outline, and to what extent do you outline before you write, as you write, to give yourself that sense of direction so that you're not just like sort of like floating hopelessly lost?
I have had such a terrible experience outlining, so I will just say very briefly, just make sure whether it's for you. I've written some short stories too, and for short stories, it has also helped me to know where this is going. For novels, the one that I tried to outline, I killed that novel for myself for a couple of years. I only came back to it last year and realized it's because I couldn't do this outline, I just need to get rid of it. But some writers just love having an outline, and it really helps them. I'm just not one of them, so just know which one you are. I prefer to explore. It helps me develop the story more slowly, kind of like cooking or something, but just know which one you are. That's all I'd say.
Yeah, I'm not an outliner, but I think, I'm just going to go back to that thing, write the scene that's calling to you. And I'll often I need this scene, and I need this scene, and I need this scene, and I'll have a list. But again, I'm drafting, so I'm just exploring. I don't know what's going to happen when I stop drafting and really look at it and go, okay, need to recalibrate things. I don't know. Writing is such a mystery. It really is. I sometimes feel like I got a little pillowcase over my head, and I'm trying to figure stuff out.
Melanie and Renee, do you outline, or rather than outline, are there ways that you find whatever the next scene is, or give yourself this sense of well, this is, if I don't know exactly where it's going, at least I know it's not going, that way?
I'm kind of I guess I take the middle path with outlining, where I've tried to do a very concrete one, and it has not worked. But I've also spent most of my writing time just sort of flailing around and being intuitive and spending years and years on stories, which I like, but I also like to finish things. So sort of been working with this strategy of, I like to write down where I've just been and kind of outline it after, so that when I look back on it, I'm working on a novel. So when I look back on it, I at least sort of know where I'm going. And then it helps me when I'm going into a scene to just kind of have a rough idea of what's going to happen, like the beginning, middle, and end, kind of actually write it on the page and refer back to it, and then that still allows me to be surprised by what I come up with.
Mm-hmm. Which is not so dissimilar from what we do in our own lives, right? We look back at our histories and try to find some sort of structure. Or with memoir, you're trying to you're telling a story that maybe has no meaning, but then you find the outline in it that sort of carries a narrative.
I've completely shifted in my writing. I never really had any views on outlining. I just never used them. Particularly, obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but not in my short story writing did I. I was mostly through, I was about halfway through with Seeing Off the Johns, the second book, and I knew where it was going, but the idea came to me for what would be, I suppose, the afterword, the epilogue of the book. Book takes place at the end. The boy gets the girl, but I didn't want to write a boy gets the girl story because those aren't true. And so I wrote 3 years later. Where he runs into her. They're running away from their hometown to Austin, and he runs into her at a show at Antone's, and they have a nice evening, and it's slowly revealed throughout the course of it how he messed it up and why he messed it up, and he was destined to mess it up. And at the end, though, he's not glad that he messed it up, but he's glad for her because she will have taught him how to love every time he loves after that. Whatever. Doing that, though, writing that ending and knowing that it was going there allowed me to make what the body of him, I guess, getting the girl story was. Now, upon writing the next manuscript, the one that's out there, it's a book in thirds. The first third is about where this couple is. The second third is about their biographies. It goes back in sections to them. And then the last third is the actual present-day happening of them blowing their marriage up. And I was done with the first 2/3, and I had to get to the meat and the happening of what was going on. And I'll be damned if I didn't sit down because of my time constraints. And okay, how is this going to happen? Where is he going to be? Where is she going to be? How is this going to go? And I just outlined the last third of the novel, and it really worked for me. So much so that upon writing the manuscript that I'm working on now, so full disclosure, my second book. I wrote it about a death in a small town, and it was more about the small town than the death or the young man who survived it upon my first coming up with the idea. The two young men who die in the book are just leaving high school, headed for college, so naturally it made sense for my protagonist to be a high schooler who was stuck in the town. That's what I thought. Upon it getting picked up by a publisher, they're like, "This is a YA book," and I was like, "Oh, okay." With this next thing that I'm going to write, though, I very specifically know that it is going to be a YA book. Despite having written and won awards for YA books, I didn't know how to write a YA book. And I felt that since I was aiming towards that, I should look into them. I teach high schoolers, I teach YA books, but when I'm reading them with them and teaching them, I'm not reading them as a writer. So one thing that I did and one thing that I suggest that you do, particularly if you're starting a brand new project or if you're starting to delve into a new form, I looked at 3 separate YA books, and I looked how they were constructed. And one was epistolary form, and that ain't my bag. One was shifting back and forth between narrators, and this one's not that. I've done that before. And another one was just a plain Jane chapter book. And my second book there, I did it in seasons, and that helped me to compartmentalize the story I was telling. My second one I divided it as I told you. With this one, I was like, okay, well, I can just write a linear story, and I can break it up into chapters. And so I literally wrote down, I happen to have gotten this book for free. I got it the first day I met Lindsey, actually, in Las Vegas. The book called Fat Angie by E. Charleston Trujillo. We did the thing where we exchanged books, and so I looked at it, and I was like, all right, she has 18 chapters. Her chapter 1 is page 1 through 14, 2 is 15 through this. I wrote all of that down just so that I could know this is what this stupid thing looks like. I knew already what my story was going to be, so then on note cards I wrote down chapter 1, plan, pages 1 through 14. Here are the things that I'm going to write in this chapter. And it's kind of glorious going through writing, ending up with 22 pages. All right, here's this. I hit all of these story marks. I'm going to cut that. I don't need that to happen in this book anymore. I've added these 3 things. I can then go through my next note cards, account for the things that I've added, cut the things that I didn't. And having started from I have inspiration for a story, I'll write down my little short story and be done when it's done. I've completely and utterly shifted from, all right, it's going to happen, I'm going to sit down and do it because that's what needs to be done, to having first written the end of the novel that I wrote, then having outlined my way out of a second novel, and then now as a crutch, because I felt like I didn't know what a YA novel was supposed to be, having just looked at page numbers. And I mean, we should all be doing market research in what we write. Like seriously, like if you're gonna tell me you write sci-fi, and I ask you what sci-fi you read, and you're like, I kind of don't. And it's just like, maybe do. So yeah, I wasn't an outliner, and I guess I am now. The next book might happen, and I might abandon it. We'll see.
In any writing project, especially like when you're starting or restarting, you get going, you've got your idea, you find the voice, you outline or you don't, you've got that momentum, and then something is inevitably going to happen that's going to sort of put on the brakes. Either because like you lose the sense of the story, or because life happens, like you're busy doing something else, and
Or a complete crisis of confidence.
a complete crisis of confidence.
I don't know what that means.
No, I know.
But-
It usually happens after I do market research.
Right, like you read like that really great book that's kind of similar to yours, and you're like, crap. All right. Are there forms of writing that are not actually like sitting down and writing? In other words, are there things that you do when you're not sitting at the computer with your notebook that keep the story going, even when, like you say, right now I don't have time because like work is crazy, family's crazy, or whatever. Are there ways that you keep the story going, but with taking notes in your phone or sticky notes or I don't know. Like, what are your strategies?
I have a project, this novel that I've revived that was dead for a couple of years because of the bad outline, that I'm working on, that I've had to put aside for a couple of months because I have another writing project and an acting project, both happening right now. So, and I mean, I don't know how to stay in touch with it without touching it every day. Touching a project every day is so magical. I cannot tell you what a difference it makes. It causes the whole world to like turn into a funnel that shoots you ideas. If you're touching it every day, you'll hear a song on the radio and be like, oh, yeah, that, like he did with Thunder Road, like, oh, that's what needs to happen with my character. Or you'll just see a car go by, and I mean, just anything. The world will just start throwing stuff at you, ideas and just things that will fit in. But if you're not touching it every day, that's going to stop happening. It just is. You've lost your relationship. I mean, I'm very sad to say it because have currently lost my relationship with that book. But
What do you mean by touching it every day? Like what constitutes?
that means that if you're really busy, still take 15 minutes. Take 15 minutes and fix one sentence. Fix a paragraph. Write a paragraph. Just touch it every day. And I think that is more useful than putting in 3 hours on the weekend, putting in 15 hours a day, 15 minutes a day. For me, at least, it really does have a magical effect. It keeps it in your mind. It keeps the whole thing alive, the relationship alive, the project alive. It's only alive when you're in this contact with it.
I'll hear bits of dialogue, and that's what I'll write down. I'll hit.
Where do you write them down? Do you have like a special notebook
Oh, God,
or?
It's way too chaotic. It's a scrap of paper here. It's inside a book. It's like stick it on the computer.
But you gotta write it down. You gotta write stuff down, or
Yeah,
you will lose
you
it.
don't.
Stuff you don't write down will go away.
It will. It'll go into the ethos, and Katherine will get it.
Yeah, the universe gives you a gift, and you don't write it down, then it'll
It's
go give it to
gone.
someone else.
It's
Yeah.
gone. Sometimes, like, if a scene is really boring or I'm writing too much dialogue, I'll close my eyes and I'll just hear the scene, hear everything that's going on in the scene. Not the words, but the kitchen, the 92-year-old with the walker, I'll hear her walker. Or then I'll go through and I'll just do the smells in a scene. I think it kind of cracks it open in a way that allows you to feel a different dimension in your novel that maybe you wouldn't otherwise.
Melanie, how about you? How do you keep the writing alive? Even do you have strategies for just keeping it alive even if you're not writing, or do you try to touch it every day?
Yeah, I love what Katherine said about touching it every day. That completely is magical. I mean, if I'm working on a project and it fizzles out, I will start it over. Just not great to think about all the time. But it is great because if you have an idea, and doing different approaches is, I consider to be a very fun process, even though it can be frustrating and disheartening to start over.
When you say you start over, does that mean that like totally from scratch, blank page, or you
Usually
go back to the beginning
not.
and begin like tinkering?
I think somewhere in between those two. Like, I won't start over completely from scratch, usually, although I've actually been meaning to try that with some short stories that have not worked out. But I think it's just really, really heavy revisions. Like, I read on a computer, so I'll have the story in front of me, and then I guess I'll basically be changing everything, but I'll still have the text up and be looking at it, and then just doing something else, like changing the voice and the point of view and sort of the pacing and the tone and the approach and all of those things. Or just trying to, reorganize something radically when I can come back to it. I guess I wouldn't do that if I was very busy and just had a few minutes. But yeah, I've found that too. If I'm trying to keep something alive, I'll just go back to it every day. And I also carry a little notebook with me. And I guess if I have an idea and I don't have the notebook, which usually I do, I'll write it on my phone, but then transpose it into the notebook. And then I have 2 other notebooks that are larger.
And Renee, do you have ways to keep it alive?
Yeah, I can't touch it every day. I can't look at it. I can't look at it every day. I can't. Not every day am I even able to open my personal laptop. And so, I have a friend. He's a warrant officer in the Army, and he's always prepared for everything. And so around his house, I stayed with him for the weekend, and he showed me where all the guns were, like where he had guns hidden behind stuff. And I was like, okay. And I'm like that with notebooks. Truly.
Me too.
So every bag I have, every desk that I sit at, I have multiple classrooms where I work, and every single one of those desks has different notebooks. Yeah, so I'm constantly writing those down. A thing that has happened, I think I told it here once before. I was at the gym, and I was trying to type a note while I was on the stupid elliptical machine, and then I saw the little microphone, and I was like, oh, voice to text. And so I was that guy who was like breathily reciting prose into his headphones. It was bad, but like it got the job done. And so if I'm somewhere where I don't have my notebooks, I always have my headphones. They have a really good like microphone on them, so I'll just like dip out and like then I'm the guy who's crouched in the corner, kind of talking low. All right, so read it back, and then I'm like, yeah, and so always having notebooks, always, and so that being said, when I do write, my writing time is at a premium. Everybody says I understand that, but between work and the kids and stuff, and so when there are those times when it's like, all right, Daddy's gonna write like "Good night, girls," or like, y'all got this, or like we even used to have like a sitter who would come. You go, you do the thing. I have several places where I like to write. I'm not going to tell you them because they're good places and they don't cost money. But sometimes you get there and you just know it's not going to happen. Like right now, words aren't going to come the way that I write. If it needs to come out as the prose that I think it's going to be. Of course, upon revision. Of course, I don't mind working with editors. Of course, I'm not too precious about it. But it's part of my process to feel that what I'm doing is precious. And that it is a precious process. Later on, I'm okay, kill them. But I have a few things that I'll do. I will make playlists for future scenes that I know are coming up, for different like emotional things that I know I'm gonna need to center myself in to get them to. But I'll also I'll just take little inventories of my characters, and I think this is something that I try to do always when I write. But it's to do with motivation. I try to keep my dialogue as pretty much like natural as possible. I let my narrative voice, I guess, do the backflips or whatever. But in every scene and in every interaction, I don't necessarily think that it's about lying, but like on whatever level that every bit of interpersonal communication that we have with the world it's manipulation. Like it can be out of a good thing, but you're doing what you're doing because you want people to do something. Even if it's I want you to be happy, you will say the thing to make them happy. It can be from a benevolent place, but it's manipulation. So, upon thinking of either the scene that I'm in or where I'm going, I ask myself what each character has. What each character knows that they have, what they're sharing, what they know they're not sharing, and what they think the other person might not be sharing, and what they're trying to get from that. I will try to write dialogue from that I know won't go into the thing. Sometimes it does. Beyond that, if I'm not in the scene, if I'm a little bit ahead of where it is, I know roughly where my characters are going to be. I have the road map. I maybe have written the end, but like there's still work to do. If I'm not yet there, I'll do character biographies. I'll put them in places. These are very small things. I'm not saying I do like heavy lifting, but a last thing, because I like to keep the dialogue natural, I let my narrative voice do a lot of heavy lifting. Dependent upon where I have things set, I'll do research. I'll do either historical research. The next manuscript is set here in Austin. I have them at a South by Southwest show on a certain night. And so, okay, what was the weather like that night? What would he be wearing? If he's on a pedicab, is he going to be cold? What bands are playing that night? Who's going to be at Stubbs? What other bands are playing downtown at a better show that he would go to? And then so I look this up, and I find this band from Mexico, this hardcore band that plays Spanish music. And then like I listen to their entire catalog, and then I end up writing them into the thing. And so just in service of making my time worthwhile, even if I'm not able to write the prose that I want to write in that moment, it'll come next time, because it has to. Because it doesn't have to, because clearly it's a compulsion of mine, because nobody's asking me to do this. There's no advance on this. And so, yeah, I try to be as kind to myself as possible, make the time count how it counts. I consider all of that writing, even if no writing is getting done, because you have to filter your thoughts. You're living with these characters. You're living with the situations they're in, the choices you know that they're going to make, the hearts you know they're going to break, or the ways in which you know their hearts are going to be broken. And if you can't do it that day, do something else that works. That's what I do.
That idea of being kind to yourself. One last question that we'll turn over to the audience. One of the other things you have to do when you're trying to like manage a new project is also manage like your own psychology, because we all have those moments, the moment of like the crisis of confidence where you're like, I suck. And sometimes it's quickly followed by, or it quickly follows the moment where you're like, I am the greatest genius on the planet. And then the next day you're like, I suck. How do you manage like the flip-flopping of like your own sense of how it's going, your own sense of your own ability to tell the story, your own like desire to tell? How do you manage all of that?
Meditation. Honestly, I mostly bring the I suck, but I definitely do have my moments of, or am I a genius? And it makes it really hard to write when you just feel like this is, and it's just so hard. Why is it so hard? Music really does help. I actually, because I don't want to listen to words while I'm writing, but I do like voices singing. My favorite thing to listen to, sort of medicinally, is Sigur Rós, because they're singing, in their early albums, they're singing in Icelandic, and then after a while they realized no one knew what they were singing. So they just started singing nonsense syllables. They made up their own language, but the point is, it's beautiful, very calm music, and I can't understand what they're saying, so it's perfect for me. It really does just like gears my body down, because part of anxiety is that you just get really revved up, and the right kind of music will really take you down, and I find that essential.
Any other strategies for managing the craziness of just like being in your own like head and emotions as you write?
Yeah.
I do hula hooping.
Exercise, that sort of thing. Reading poetry helps. I really want to say something about this because I think we all struggle with that, the bad voice in our head. And I think there's nobody in the world that beats me up worse than I do. And so how do I stop that? And I have to, it's like sitting down and trying to be your own best friend. And I don't know, it's tricky. I feel like I'm going through the eye of the needle sometimes. And you just have to sit down and be kind and say, let's write, Lindsey. Let's see what we've got to say today. I took off all of December. I didn't look at my manuscript. And I'm trying to not print it out until I feel like I've got a full first draft. But I did have to sit down at the beginning of January and read the whole thing through. I kept it in the computer. I didn't print it. And it was really refreshing because I read things, it was like, whoa, that's pretty good. Okay, yeah, I like this character. And I didn't criticize, I didn't go in and edit a bunch. I just got familiar with the story and kept going. But it's hard to be kind to yourself. And I think it's really important to read aloud. I think it's important to have a friend who will read your stuff and not be hypercritical. say what they're hearing. So for me, a critique group is really helpful. And they can't be mean. So yeah, I go to therapy.
Meditation also really does help. It really does help, but it helps everything. So
Any tricks, Melanie?
Let's see. Agree on meditation, Zumba. I think walking, being in nature, that kind of stuff. And then I was thinking, like, I managed to kill my inner critic for about 3 weeks when I was at a writer's residency in Nebraska. And I was trying to remember how I did it, and I don't know. I think part of it was I just was spending so much time with my work. I was only doing things that I enjoyed, which was reading, actually not all that much, but some, writing a fair amount, walking around, going to the gym, cooking, things like that. So I don't know what it was. I made some bad decisions about the thing that I was working on once I had killed my inner critic, because I had decided that everything I came up with was an incredibly good idea and I would just run with it. But I still think it's worth doing. I just don't know how I did it. Something else that's happened to me is I feel very critical of my own work, but if I go back and read it, especially a long piece, as Lindsey was just talking about, I get kind of hypnotized by it. And I think if that happens, it's good. I mean, it's not the final version by any means, but if you can still go back and look at something that you did and become immersed in it, I think it's sort of easy to have that happen, and when it does happen, it's a good thing.
False confidence and self-deception.
And low expectations.
Oh, yeah.
I can't vouch for that one. I have effectively killed or silenced whatever critic voice was inside my head, I suppose. I don't know. I can't repeat this enough. I don't know why I wrote the first 2 books. The second book was mostly done by the time the first one was under contract. And so, but after that, it's like, well, clearly somebody cares about this, and like, I put it out in the world, and someone said it was worth them putting forth money and printing, and so like that's clearly I can do this. I have a proven track record of being able to do this. This is what I care to do. I think a big part of that too, though, is that it's not my job. Being a writer is not my only job. It's my passion. Just like when I was in school, I did all the schoolwork and I read whatever they told me to read. Pardon me. That'll show my teachers. But like I didn't internalize any of it because that was the work that I was doing. Like that was there, and all of my mind and my imagination and everything that I could do with that was mine. And ever since I entered college, I've had to work. I've always had to work. The jobs have gone from menial to fulfilling and life affirming, like teaching. You know, what you have to do with your time and with your body sometimes, the exhaustion that you have, that belongs to the work, but nothing can take away what's in your mind. Like my art is mine. And now I have proof that somebody cares about it. And so I don't have that voice telling me, Upon going back and rereading, it's just like, whoa, buddy, you think pretty highly of yourself. But when it comes to me and when I'm putting it down, I not only do I not listen to that voice, but I don't think I have that voice. Like, upon writing a first draft, overshare. I mean, I'm good enough at hating myself outside of the writing. I don't talk about writing when I'm in therapy, but my creativity and my creative output, even before I knew I was going to be a writer, has always been my refuge from all the other stuff, and so it remains to be. But now, of course, I have to deal with editors, and I know that's coming, and sometimes I am in it, and when I'm telling myself, you're good, you got this, you're good, you got this, I finish something, I'm like, the editor will get that, but you're good, you got this. So yeah, false confidence and self-deception.
Please give our panelists a warm round of applause.
This has been the Writers League of Texas podcast. For more information about the Writers League of Texas and our many programs and services for writers, visit our website at writersleague.org. Email us at wlt@writersleague.org or give us a call at 512-499-8914. Thank you for listening.